When people ask me, what's so special about First Baptist on Fifth? I answer quickly. It's not our building, though lovely, or our worship, though meaningful. Not our gatherings, though life-giving, or even our missions and ministries in the world, though impactful. The very best part of First on Fifth? Our people, hands down. In our confession of identity, we said this of our community. Here, you'll see retirees and families with rambunctious little ones, teenagers discovering their identities, middle-agers juggling all the demands of this season, young people navigating adulthood for the first time, and seniors rich in wisdom and encouragement. You can read our fiery op-eds in the paper, pass us moving about on the city streets, see us building ramps for the underserved, catch us finding beauty in our gardens and on hiking trails, and experience us taking delight in the world. At the core of our community, we are folks who love each other well. And at the core of our life together, we share in meaningful conversation about what it means to live and love in this world. That's what you'll hear and who you'll hear from in our new podcast series called Life Together. Each episode will be hosted by one of our ministers and will feature a conversation with one or two or even several of our beloved church members. They'll answer a handful of questions about their story, about objects or artifacts that represent their journey, about questions or doubts they wrestle with, and why they are a member, and finally, what gives them hope. As you listen to their wisdom and laughter, their audacious hope and abundant love, I trust you'll be as inspired and moved as I am on the regular. T.S. Eliot once asked, "What life have you if you have not life together?" Join us this season for Life Together. Hello and welcome to the First Baptist on Fifth Life Together podcast. We're so glad that you've been joining us this season, and we're grateful today to welcome Ann Phelps and Kenneth Townsend to the podcast. Welcome to the two of you. Let me tell you about these two wonderful friends. Ann Phelps is the Director of Programming for Leadership and Character here at Wake Forest University. Ann has a long background, and as someone who shares many intersecting points of this background, I can so appreciate a background of the intersection of religion, the arts, and modern culture from your time at the Institute for Sacred Music at Yale Divinity School. You were also at Yale where you met Kenneth. Kenneth was there at Yale, also in the school, not the Divinity School though, right? The law school?
Both.
No. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
You had a dual. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kenneth. Kenneth is the executive director of Leadership and Character in the Professional Schools at Wake Forest, is a teaching professor in the School of Law, and a presidential higher education fellow in the Office of the President at Wake Forest. I had to write all that down to make sure that I got it right. You two wonderful friends have three beautiful children, William, Abigail, and Annabelle, 9, 7, and 10 months. And as, you know, one with an Annabelle, I always love other folks.
Big Annabelle and little Annabelle.
That's right. That's right. You have been here in Winston-Salem for 5 or 6 years now?
Almost 6.
Almost
6 years in a couple weeks.
Yep.
Yeah, by way of Mississippi.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's such a delight to have you here at First Baptist and have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
glad to
So
be
thanks for
having us.
joining us. Okay, let me start. Those of you who've been listeners of the podcast know we've got 5 questions that we're asking to everyone in this first season. And the first question is, tell us your story, particularly people, places, or seasons of your life that have most powerfully shaped, for good or ill, your understanding of God and self.
You want to go? You want me
Oh,
to go?
you go.
Oh, so modest. So when I hear this question, I really like the calling out of places.
Yes.
Places that have shaped your faith. And that was really evocative for me. And I think what it does is calls up an experience I had when I was 20 years old. So I'm from rural Nebraska,
Yes.
truly the farthest place you can get on this planet from the ocean.
Wow.
And I had never seen the ocean until I was 20 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And even then, the first time I saw it, it was in Dover, England, the sort of the base of the White Cliffs of Dover. I could see France on the other side, right? I couldn't, it was the English Channel. It was not the ocean as we often think about it, but it was an incredibly formative experience for me because of when and how I got there. So I had grown up in rural Nebraska from some really wonderful, open-minded, progressive parents. But my community was one that was really in the throes of a sort of conservative religious fervor growing up. And so I had these dual influences and really just wanted to know what was true, right? I just wanted to know what was true. And so I got to college, became a religion major. And as a part of that major, I was doing a summer research project on pilgrimage. And I was really deconstructing a lot of the faith claims that the community around me had told me were absolutely essential that I cling to. Otherwise, that was eternity perishing without those things. And I just didn't believe some of it.
Wow.
And so I went on this pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. And in England, I encountered a very different religious landscape than that of rural Nebraska.
You don't say.
It's shocking. And I just remember, I'd been studying these theologians and religious history. And I remember standing there in Canterbury Cathedral, listening to the choir sing. And music for me, obviously, is a really transcendental experience often. And just encountering what I would come to call, borrowing Paul Tillich's language, the God beyond God.
Yes.
I no longer needed to believe God was X, Y, or Z, but what was past that? When I let go of those things, what was past that? And I realized at the end of that service that we were only like 20 minutes from the shore, from Dover. And I thought, I'm going to go see the ocean for the first time. And I went and I sat there and sort of thought about that notion, right? That there's this something that I am communing with right now, praying to and letting go of all I'm supposed to think about what God is, and instead being present to what I am experiencing and just saying, I am this kind of person who does things like goes to Canterbury and sees the ocean. And I am not just what this little world in rural Nebraska has told me I am supposed to be, but I am called to that beyond, that God beyond God. And I think that for me was sort of the first time I was truly liberated from a really dogmatic understanding of what faith can be. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is beautiful. And I can imagine so many people resonating with that part of your story. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Kenneth,
So
what
I
about
should have
you?
gone first so that it builds it builds to the
There you
better.
go.
So
It's funny because I've known you long enough that
Yeah.
I'm so curious which story you're going to go with. There are
Yes.
some good ones.
Yeah. So I think I'll speak in generalities to begin with, and maybe drill down into something as specific as what Ann offered. But as far as early influences, growing up with my family was very committed to their faith. I grew up in an evangelical conservative tradition that was extremely formative and influential in my early life. I can point to one moment in ninth grade that was in some ways represented a pivot in the way that I saw my faith and the ways in which I sort of saw things to be a bit more complicated than I had before at that point. And I remember it was September of 96. I don't remember dates, so this was key that I actually remember this. And I was talking with a friend of mine, Eric, and he at the time had gotten saved and was very much on a it's works pathway, right? And he was talking about James 2, faith without works is dead. And I was raised in the PCA tradition, Presbyterians, and we were all about grace. And I was arguing, for it is by grace you've been saved through faith, not by works, lest any man should boast. And this ended up being a fraught conversation because I had scripture backing up what I was saying, and he had scripture backing up what he was saying. And everything that I'd been taught up to that point had been premised upon the inerrancy of scripture. And that was scary. That was pretty scary. And I didn't tell anybody about it for a while. It was probably 2 years or so before I mentioned it to my best friend, and then another year or two before I finally mentioned this challenge to my parents the week before I moved into college. But part of what led me, so skipping ahead a few years, part of what led me to go to Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, was it had the reputation for being a place that was welcoming of folks, including people who had questions,
Yeah,
about
sure.
their faith and maybe weren't towing all the lines. And Millsaps proved extraordinarily helpful in that regard for me. And I'll credit the chaplain perhaps as much as anybody in my life for helping me find a measure of continuity between the person that I was and maybe the faith that I had been brought up with and the person I was becoming and the faith that I was finding. I think up until arriving at Millsaps and even into my first year or two there, I found myself thinking I had to make a choice.
Yes.
Right? Was I going to be
It's either
the
binary
person that
this
I
or that.
was, or was I going to leave it all behind and become a different person who rejected all of that? And Don Fortenberry was his name. He was the chaplain at the time, longtime chaplain, served as chaplain for over 30 years at Millsaps. And he helped me think about my identity in ways that were more continuous, right? That were less binary. And in many ways kind of saved me as a result.
Oh, man.
Right. And I don't think that I wouldn't have gone on to do an honors thesis in religious studies or go on to divinity school,
Yes.
where Ann and I met, if not, I think, for the influence of Don. So, yeah. And then as far as other places, maybe we'll get to some of this later, but Marquand Chapel, Yale Divinity School, that's where we met, and it has a sacredness to it, right? It I feel like holds so much, right? And so that's a particular place that I think that's been formative.
I'm so struck by both of your stories and the way so much of your working life is the work of integration and intersection. You're talking about leadership and character. You're living in spaces between law and theology, between theology and arts and leadership and character. And I mean, that you describe the nuance of God beyond, that you describe moving beyond binaries to this integrative work that holds the complexity of life and faith. And I'm somehow not surprised that knowing the nature of your stories and knowing the nature of your work, that these stories are the ones that speak right into.
Funny you say that, because when we first met, that was part of what I think drew us to one another. When we first really got to know each other, there's a poem that Kenneth really loves that describes both of us, and we recognize this in one another. I'll let you actually recite it. You were the English major.
Yeah.
But it was a line from Matthew Arnold.
Yeah, so it's from Lines from Grand Chartreuse. And so I mentioned continuity a moment ago and trying to bridge these different worlds. And for the English poetry nerds, right, it's written in iambic tetrameter, which unrhymed rhymed, 8-syllable lines. And so the whole poem is written in iambic tetrameter, and it's a reflection of Matthew Arnold. And hiking in the woods, he comes upon a monastery, and he's peeking into this monastery, and he's observing the rituals and everything. And he was a man of faith himself, but struggled later in life for it to all connect and sync up. And so right there in the very middle of the poem, there are these two lines that diverge from the iambic tetrameter. So instead of having 8 syllables, they go out to 9 syllables. And they are wandering between two worlds. One dead, the other powerless to be born. And then for Arnold, it goes back to 8 syllables, because it's like he's stretching out, trying to find like this new interpretation, this new meaning. Like how can I reimagine the faith that I've been brought up with that doesn't really sync up in this post, we have Darwin, post-Darwinian industrial society. And he doesn't get there. It goes back to 8 syllables. But I think that was something we talked a lot about is finding what is, right? Not getting caught in that in-between.
Tell me the line one more time.
So it's wandering between two worlds, one dead, so that's 9, the other powerless to be born, 9.
Oh,
so those are that's when it diverges, and then it goes back. Yeah.
But that notion, right, that both of us sort of lived with one foot in this faith-based world and one foot in this deeply questioning identity and who we were created as and called to be, that we wanted to stand in that liminal space. We didn't want to have to pick a camp.
That's right.
There weren't a lot of people standing in that gap, but we saw each other there.
That's right.
Good place to be.
That's really beautiful. Okay, so from this, and I'm sure there's at least one or two English nerds out there that really appreciated iambic tetrameter. So thank you for that.
Iambic tetrameter for your podcast today.
I haven't thought about iambic tetrameter in a very long time. So thank you. Thank you. All right. So my next question is about artifacts. So we spoke about place and about this, you know, these intersecting points of life. But now I'm curious, you know, if you had to choose one or two artifacts that kind of are representative for you of your life of faith, you know, what would they be? Or just the journey of your life, what would they be?
I suspect we're going to have at least one in common. So I'm going to leave that one for you.
Okay.
Because bringing us back to Mark 1 Chapel.
Yeah, good.
But I would say a couple that come to mind for me, I was thinking about this. A big one, again, with my life being so situated in sacred music, I worked as a musician for the Episcopal Church for many years, and often struggled with the language in some of that tradition, deeply paternalistic language, super open polity in that tradition, but really, really paternalistic language often in the tradition. And so I have this copy of the 1982 hymnal, which is the hymnal most Episcopal churches use, and it is just filled with marginalia and post-it notes with me tweaking the language a little bit to make it a little broader and more open. And I think pretty much every hymn that I led or cantored for out of that hymnal, some tweak was made at some point.
Yeah.
And so that is a big one. And then another one that comes to mind is about 4 years ago, I had an incredible privilege to work with the artist Makoto Fujimura, who is this incredible Japanese artist. And he brought together a group of artists from various backgrounds, various media, to get trained in this modified version of the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is this tradition in Japan where you mend broken ceramics, especially sacred tea bowls, which is really important there, with liquid gold rather than throwing them away. And the more they've been broken and mended, the more beautiful they are considered. And then they're passed down. And I was trained in this very simplified, modified version of this, but became part of this artist community. And one of the objects that I mended in that training, and I've gone on to do these kintsugi workshops since then, but one of the first objects I mended in learning to do it was actually to bring this story full circle, we went back and worked at Millsaps after we met in divinity school. And actually, for 1 year, I was the interim chaplain. So I was not the 30-year chaplain, Dawn Fortenberry.
Wow.
But I was the interim chaplain there for 1 year, which is a whole other long story. But I'm not ordained. And I had chosen not to be ordained at first in the PCUSA tradition and then in the Episcopal tradition. And then I was working at this Methodist college. And it was Ash Wednesday. And I was in charge of getting all of the Eucharist stuff ready and had to call in a friend who was an ordained Methodist pastor, Joey, to come and preside over Eucharist because I can't do that. And after the service, he and I were chatting in the parking lot and he's giving me back the chalice and the plate and all the stuff. And I drop the chalice and it shatters in the parking lot at Millsaps on Ash Wednesday.
Oh.
And I still to this day say, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
But I think it's clear I'm not called to ordination. And so I don't know what compelled me to keep that. But even when we moved here, I kept that piece and I brought it to New York with me for this training with Mako and this community of artists. One of the big pieces of that kintsugi tradition is after you mend a piece, you name the piece. And that's sort of the sacred moment. And I named the piece Broken for You. Obviously,
oh my
that
gosh.
ritualistic tradition. And now I use that broken chalice. I am not ordained, but I often say that my job at Wake Forest is more like ministry than any of my actual ministry jobs were. And we have this initiation for our scholarship recipients each fall. And we distribute to them the little pins with the seal of the Program for Leadership and Character. And I use that chalice to hold the pins as I hand them to them and say, this is a gift of gratitude for your leadership and something for your service. I don't remember what we say, but a little bit of a Eucharistic-esque moment that I use in a context that does not require the kind of ordination that I am not called to. But yeah, those are maybe my two artifacts. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. And Anne left an easy one for me, so thank you. So, and she can elaborate as appropriate on it. But at our wedding in Marquand Chapel at Yale Divinity School, we had people from diverse traditions represented. And, one of the great things about Eucharist is it brings people together, but we also recognize there'd be a lot of people there who had very different faith backgrounds.
Sure.
And so Anne is very creative and artistic, came up with this idea that under everyone's chair, there would be a little stone and a pencil. And then instead of doing a traditional Eucharist, people would write just a one word sort of hope or prayer or something on that stone, and then they would carry it up and place it at the front. And right before this has happened, we right, in terms of ordering, we had sung "Come Thou Fount."
Well, they were doing it as we were singing.
As it's happening, right? Yeah. So it's happening as we're singing "Come Thou Fount," and so you might recall in "Come Thou Fount," "Here I raise mine Ebenezer," and Ebenezer is what? It's like the stone of remembrance, right? It's this thing that you place to remember a moment, to mark a time, and again, she's very creative and artistic. And so not only did people do that in the moment, so it was something that was inclusive, brought people in, helped people, give people a chance to kind of wish us well on our way in our marriage at the outset. But in our at our coffee table at home now, she has all of those stones spread out with a wedding album in the middle. And so we see those daily as a daily reminder, as a daily Ebenezer of our relationship, of our marriage, but also of our faith journeys as well.
And the community that gathered around us that day and said, like, we affirm that moving forward, this is something we say, you now move forward together.
I love that so much. And I want you to know this quick story, if you'll permit me. So I was just checking. Okay.
I see.
It's such a thing. Yeah.
So when our church made the hard decision to tear down 2 of our buildings, on the last Sunday that we were in the buildings was Pentecost Sunday. And we encouraged folks before we had our opening worship to go throughout the building. And we had stones that they were to take 2 stones, one to write a word of gratitude for the space and take it to place it in a space where they had met God, a space that, where they can bless and give thanks for. And then to bring another stone with them into worship, a word of blessing for where we're headed. Yeah. As we sang, "Come Thou Fount." I was really serious. So when you said, I was like, oh my word.
Yes. Well, it's a great ritual. It makes sense that the Spirit's moving us all to do it in different ways.
It is. There is something like, I don't know, the weight of a stone in our hands that just can create that meaningful space to remember. Definitely. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. Okay, you both have spoken really beautifully in our conversation about questions or doubts that you've experienced, that these were formative for you on your story of life and faith, to take you from rural Nebraska to England, to have you wrestling with what does it mean when the Bible can contradict itself, and what does that, how does that engage your life of faith? So I'm curious, what are some questions and doubts that persist for you? What are the ones that you keep returning to?
It's really interesting. In the line of work that we're in, we quote with our students the poet and writer Rilke a lot, and his quote, live the questions now, then perhaps one day, without even noticing it, you will have lived your way into the answers. And I do think that the last 20 years or so have really been a journey for me of truly learning to love questions. And I love the way Richard Rohr puts it when he says that doubt is not the opposite of faith. Certainty is. Yes. Right? Certainty requires no faith at all.
Yes, that's right.
It is the place where we don't know. And so often for me, the doubts have to do with how to live. I don't always know in these times, in this world that is just riddled with injustice, and I am the beneficiary of so much privilege and so many blessings and so many gifts. I don't always know the right way to live, and it requires a lot of faith to just put one foot in front of the other and hope that I'm not causing more harm than good. I think that's a big one. And then the other ones that are still theological, there are things that people would say are central to what it means to be a Christian that I just, for better or worse, God created me in a way that I don't buy it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, those things these days revolve. I've come to peace with a lot of those claims, and I would imagine that a lot of people who also identify as Christians also struggle with some of those claims, or like myself, embrace the fact that they're not interested in that kind of literal interpretation. But for me right now, the more salient and personal ones surround ideas of the agency of God, I think. God's agency, God's self-awareness, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I could get real, theological here and delve into all kinds of abstract thought, and I won't. But I think questions of God's agency is pretty big for me.
Yeah.
Especially in prayer settings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that.
I think I echo a lot of that. I feel like there's so many questions in so many ways. I feel like I figured out so little. And I think that what I've seen, and this I think resonates with what Ann was just saying, as time has progressed, I think 25 years ago, when I was, I guess, in college or maybe late high school, I felt like I really needed to figure these things out.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
I had to get the answer.
Yeah.
Was God X or Y?
Yes.
Right? Did this or that happen? And there are probably good reasons to think through those things and not to denigrate those who spend their lives wrestling with those kinds of questions. But I think that for me, those kinds of questions just became a bit less salient. And it relates to something we were talking about earlier, right? Living in the ambiguity, right? Coming to recognize that you're not probably going to have it all figured out.
Yeah, sure.
But you have to put one foot in front of the other, and you have to make decisions about how to live, and you need to be reflective about what the result is if you are a believer, if you're a Christian, whatever language we want to use, right? Has your life been shaped as a result in a meaningful way? Are you more generous?
Yes.
Are you more compassionate?
Yes.
Are these fruits of the Spirit sort of present, manifested? And so I think that is where more of my energy has focused over the last 15, 20 years. Does that mean the doubts are gone? No. I don't know. You ask me some of these ontological sorts of questions about the nature and being of God. I don't know, right? I mean, I'm happy to have the conversation, but I don't feel like I have a lot of those answers. But it causes me less anxiety now than it did 20 years ago.
Definitely.
There's something to say, to go back to your Richard Rohr quote that I used in a sermon a couple weeks ago about doubt, the story of doubting Thomas. And there's something to say when the pursuit of certainty is no longer the point that your life is moving toward, like when you just can relinquish that and say,
we were out of town that week, but we heard from a friend who was there that day that it was amazing. He said that we really needed to take 15 minutes and listen to it. So we'll have to do that.
I talked about, one of the things I talked about was like how I struggled with prayer. What is prayer? Like, I don't, had a good decade of my life where I just very stridently did not believe in prayer. But then that, I think I probably, much like you just articulated, Kenneth, was trying to move toward a certainty of what happens and what is God doing, and and being able to stop worrying so much about that and just letting prayer be this continuous conversation and space to enter into the presence of God and not be so focused on the outcome. Which for Americans that are wired toward productivity and outcomes, like that's that's hard.
Rohr writes beautiful meditations on contemplative prayer and sort of I used to lead a service at the cathedral in Jackson, the Episcopal Cathedral in Jackson, like an evensong service that was a contemplative evensong, and we would read through how Rohr describes contemplative prayer, and then we would chant, whether it was Taizé or a similar kind of chant, and then just sit in silence together. And it was that was a really formative liturgical space for me, to be sure.
You have spoken really beautifully, both of you, about your varied denominational backgrounds.
Yeah.
I am a mutt.
Like PCA, PCUSA, Episcopal, Methodist, Millsaps is
Methodist, yeah.
Yes. And here you are at a Baptist church.
Yes,
and here you are. So, like, talk to us, like, what brought you here to First Baptist Church on Fifth? And I'm curious, this isn't on my paper, but I'm curious, like, you're now in a Baptist expression. How does that feel to you?
Baptist traditions have had their role in our formation.
Yeah.
You open with the question how your experiences shaped you in for good or for ill.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think for both of us, there was the ill piece to our previous encounters with some pieces of the Baptist tradition. But as I spoke about that community of origin that was going through this sort of revival and fervor, it was identifying as Baptist, although it had very heavy Pentecostal influences as well, which was an interesting combination. But in some ways, coming here, it's been really healing because you can see how the roots of those traditions that have manifest so differently in those spaces than they do here, they have a really holy origin and can be used in really holy ways, right? Like part of what makes the liturgy that we go through on Sunday mornings Baptist is that every week it ends with you inviting people to make commitments of various sorts if they feel so inclined. That kind of liturgical move was coercive and wielded at me at church camp. And I was told that my evolutionist father was the reason I was going to hell. And I mean, all these things, right? And if I didn't come forward, it was going to be for his soul and his eternity as well as my own. I mean, but now it's been really redemptive to see it in this healthy, beautiful way that is truly an invitation. And it's not a once and for all turning, but we're always evolving and moving and changing. That's, I really love that. And I just, that for me, the role of the Baptist tradition, this has been a really restorative place for that. And this community obviously is a community of redemption and restoration for so many people. And that is very felt here. And the community is, I mean, a huge piece. The people that are gathered in this space, the way people treat one another, the way that all are welcome, but no one is coerced to be here is really helpful to me.
Yeah, all that resonates. Yeah, I've bounced around a lot. You know, grew up PCA. In college, mostly went to Methodist and Episcopalian churches, and then I'd say much of my adult life was mostly Methodist, Episcopal, PCUSA for a little while. So bounced around different mainline Protestant type contexts. And I think I am. If we had more time, I'd be happy to talk more about this. I do feel like I'm very Protestant in a lot of ways.
Yeah, sure.
But as far as the Baptist tradition in particular, and landing here at First and Fifth, even more particularly, I do think that there's also, related to what Ann was saying, but I think that there is just, there's like a combination of low and high church that is a good sort of fit, I think, for me and for us.
Yeah.
It's low church in the sense that, you know, there's not kneeling, and it's a very sort of anybody
for a long time. This is not an Episcopal
so anybody can kind of step in and more or less kind of see what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's also not so low church that it feels sort of totally untethered from a tradition, right? And so I think that combination is a nice combination for our orientation, at least for my orientation. I think that's probably the case for you as well. And I like what you said about the invitation at the end. I think that is a nice sort of reclaiming of maybe some of what we had both encountered at earlier stages. I'll also say that something that's been very important for us is your preaching.
Absolutely.
Right? I think that for both of us, we have found ourselves at churches where there's good preaching. The last church we went to in Jackson, where Ann worked for a little while, was PCUSA.
Yeah.
But part of the reason we landed there was the pastor was a really good preacher, and we value somebody who actually says something that we find meaningful and resonant and can talk about, on the way home from church and feel like it's not just a prelude to the Eucharist or just a kind of a quick little, here's some nice things to reflect on, or let's just quickly do a quick exegesis of a couple of verses and that's it.
And equally important to me, obviously, is, this is a shout out to David and Jake. The music here is excellent, and not in a way that is exclusive to other voices or other cultural traditions, in a way that embraces it and values it and draws that in. And I just think it is remarkable in the era that we're in of AirPods and only listening to music alone. Yeah. To go, I just think about not this past year, but the year before, when I was pregnant with Annabelle, but nobody knew it yet. And we came to the Lessons and Carols service. And I think I cried the whole service from the get-go. And just those songs, but being sung with such intention and beauty. And not that talent is the most important thing, but there's a ton of talent in this congregation, which means that we can offer that as this like beautiful gift to one another. That's really important to me. And the music here, not because it's bad if it's not, but the music here is a really important spiritual experience for me. And again, the community, like particular people matter, right? So we were really dear friends with Jason Coker, who's a friend of this community in Jackson. We've stayed good friends, and he, was always encouraged. We moved here during COVID, and so we couldn't really explore churches very well. Right. And once we could, it was really great. And then also a shout out to the community. The number one person who got us through these doors was Silas McGee. William was a first grader and Silas was a kindergartner, and Silas's presence at aftercare just revolutionized William's social life. And coming to church with Silas and seeing that this was a place our kids wanted to be, and we could, as Kenneth said, your preaching is so good, but I also love that we don't have to leave here. Very few churches do we attend, and I don't leave wanting to set something on fire because I've been so frustrated. I never leave outraged, and that's a low bar, but that's my... And it's nice to know that my kids are encountering a message of love and justice and truth and beauty that I can get on board with, and that they're seeing that in the other people. And then it's just, I think about like quintessential stories, right? I think about our first Ash Wednesday here when the kids are stripping the altar and I'm sitting there in the pew, and every time Silas walks back up the aisle, he winks at me and points. And I'm just trying not to die laughing in this silent, somber, but it's that wonderful balance of just the humanity of it. Silas winking at me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I not laugh out loud at this kid? And I love that there's just like that real human element. It's a really beautiful combination.
Oh my gosh. It is the Sundays that Silas is the happiest are the Sundays that y'all are here. Yeah. So that he can sit with you. Thank you.
Yes, we love
for
it.
being
we
part
love
of
it.
the village.
Sure. It's a good village.
With my kids.
It's a good village.
Oh
my gosh. So we've had a lot of fun. In that way.
Well, it's so meaningful to me, like just tremendously meaningful to me to hear you articulate like pieces that, that you find meaningful. So thank you for sharing that. It really means a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So my last question for us, we could talk all day. We will just have to redo this.
We have on Bleachers.
Oh, that's right. So tell me, like, what gives you hope? What gives you hope right now? You both are spending your lives helping young people find their way to leadership and character in a world that seems to value leadership and character less and less in certain spaces. And so, like, not just in your work, but in your life, like, what's giving you hope right now?
I think that on the life front, I think having children can't help but give you hope. Because you see so much hope in them and potential, and there's so much, right? And you just want to make sure to do whatever you can to make sure that potential is appropriately lived into, and so I think that's in some ways kind of easy, even though there are so many reasons not to feel hopeful. I think you just can't help. At least that's how I feel. Like you just can't help but feel like there is a basis for hope, right? When you're interacting with your small children. As far as professionally, I I think that there are reasons to be discouraged, to be sure. I think you look around. I work with professional school populations, as you noted at the outset, and lawyers are struggling.
Yeah.
Legal institutions are not trusted. We have low and declining levels of social trust. We have, it seems like, rising levels of perhaps just increased awareness, but it seems like increased levels of substance abuse and various bad things, right?
Fair.
And all kinds of reasons for discouragement, polarization along lots of different dimensions, alienation, fragmentation. But I think that if you drill down a little bit, so if you talk about the work that we're doing in the program for leadership and character, that work does give me hope, actually. This work has been just, it has exceeded all our expectations, right? We started here less than 6 years ago, and Ann and I were basically employees 2 and 3. There'd been a fellow, and we have 40 people on the team now. If you look at it from the programs that we've been able to organize, the fundraising successes that we've had, the lives I think that have been shaped in meaningful sorts of ways. It's really encouraging to see that there is an appetite.
Yeah.
There really is an appetite in the professions as well as in other contexts, I think, for thinking more holistically about professional formation.
Yep.
And not to get this too political, but I think that some of the high-profile instances maybe that have revealed lack of integrity or lack of character have in some ways made it easy for a wider range of people to say, oh, well, maybe that is something we should tend to.
Yep.
Maybe that is something we should care about.
Yep.
So that gives me hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's undeniable that the kids will give you hope. Similar with my students. I mean, I get to work with these undergrads who, some of whom are just coming in in the red in many ways, exhausted, traumatized, others eager and excited and energized, different orientations, different backgrounds, and watching them across difference explore these questions of meaning and purpose, and grow over time, and really just watching the way they shape each other. If we can just create spaces where people can be human together, it's really a hopeful enterprise to witness. And I'm going to give an answer of a place in my own life, not just where I'm the facilitator of that, or I do very little. I'm the container of this for these amazing undergraduate students. But in my own life where I get to experience this, and I'm going to regret saying this because, man, do I complain about the schedule, is youth baseball. William plays a lot of baseball. I mean, this boy came into this world swinging a bat. We don't know where it came from, but he loves baseball, and he is pretty good at it. And so we play a lot of baseball, which means that we spend a lot of time with the other families on this travel team and in our little league crew. And watching these families and how much they care for their own children and how much they want to shape their kids, seeing how sports can, even though it's not necessarily my native language, the way the arts is, can be a vehicle to call these kids to grow and try and fail well and teach each other and have humility as well as drive. But one of the most interesting facets of it is that, these are good people, good families who care about their community and their kids and are invested and are present, and they're kind and they're smart, and not all of them voted like me.
Yeah.
And that's really hard for me to understand. Really hard for me to understand. And shocking if I would have told myself 5 years ago that I would trust someone who voted differently than me in this last election to watch my kid all day.
Oof.
And I do.
Yeah.
I don't think a second about it. And it's helping stretch me. And it's also helping give me an understanding of a perspective that I wouldn't have access to otherwise, not in the sense that I agree with it, but I can understand that maybe someone could vote differently than me and have some questions about the person they voted for and have some hesitation, and maybe that even the people I don't understand in the deepest ways aren't completely lost.
Yeah.
And so how can we as a society learn to trust each other, even when we've settled on different answers in the end.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, and I'm not as good at it as he is. But he works in political spaces, and I don't.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge. But just watching people love each other and take care of each other, even when they're different, is really helpful. I think hopeful for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm glad that youth baseball, just travel baseball, its stock keeps rising. This is good.
Next time you're like, why am I doing this?
How many days a week do we have practice
Give
this
me
week?
hope. That's it.
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly.
That's it. That's it. Conversation with the two of you is like drawing from a deep well, like a
Likewise.
very tall, refreshing, cool drink of water. Thank you for sharing
Gosh.
of yourself, your life, your family with this community. We are all the richer for it. So thank you for sharing.
This is
today.
fun.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Emily, and thank you to everyone in this community. I mean, it's been a beautiful thing
Yeah.
to
Real
feel
gift.
so embraced and cared
Yes.
for, and to watch people just love this little baby as we bring her in each
Oh my
day.
gosh,
And
your baby Annabelle is like the star. I know. We've had this little baby boom here at the church.
yes, it's amazing.
I know all these babies.
Yeah.
And people like my daughter Annabelle just she'll come home and she'll be like, guess what I got to do today? Tell me all
She's
about
sweet.
it.
She's so sweet.
We feel really lucky and embraced and loved by this place. So thank
Gratitude abounds, as you love to say.
Mail signature.
That's it.
Gratitude abounds.
Gratitude abounds. That's a great note to end on. So, with those of you who've joined us today, thank you for joining us. You know where to find our podcast anywhere. You can find podcasts. You can catch earlier episodes of our Life Together podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.